She touched down in New York, and the city already knew her name. Alex Eala has arrived for the U.S. Open, and this time, nobody's overlooking her. Not long ago, she was the outsider, the underdog, the name people needed subtitles to pronounce. Now, she's the storm every seed in the draw is quietly dreading. Because what's building around her in Flushing Meadows isn't just hype, it's a movement carried across an ocean by a country that's waited generations for a moment like this. And the question isn't whether she belongs here anymore, it's how far this run can actually go. Every great story has a beginning most people miss. For Alex Eala, that beginning wasn't a red carpet or a national spotlight. It was quiet. It was patient. It was years of a young girl from the Philippines chasing a dream that for most of her childhood felt impossibly far away. Tennis is not a sport that has historically belonged to the Philippines. There was no long lineage of Filipino champions to look up to, no well-worn path from junior courts to Grand Slam stadiums. Alex Eala had to build that path herself, one match, one loss, one small victory at a time. She left home young, training abroad, absorbing a game that demanded she be better, faster, and more resilient than players who had access to resources she didn't. It's easy, now, to see her name trending and assume the success arrived overnight. It didn't. Before the headlines, there were years of anonymous tournaments, of long flights, of matches played in front of nearly empty stands. There were moments of doubt that never made it into any article, the kind every young athlete carries quietly, wondering if the sacrifice will ever be worth it. What makes Eala's rise so compelling isn't just the winning, it's the weight she carries every time she steps onto a court. She isn't just playing for herself, she's playing as the face of a nation that has rarely seen itself represented at this level of the sport. Every match becomes bigger than tennis. It becomes a symbol of possibility, of belief, of what happens when someone refuses to accept that where you're from should limit how far you can go. By the time she started appearing in the WTA's mid-level tournaments, something had already shifted in her game. She wasn't intimidated by bigger names. She wasn't playing not to lose. She was playing to win, aggressively, fearlessly, as if she already knew she belonged among the players she'd once only watched on television. And then came the moment that changed everything. Last year at the U.S. Open, Alex Eala did something no Filipino tennis player had ever done in the history of the Open era. She won a Grand Slam main draw match, not just won it, but clawed her way back from the brink, rallying from a devastating 1-5 deficit in the deciding set, to outlast Denmark's Clara Tauson in a tiebreaker that will be replayed in Philippine sports history for decades to come. It wasn't a clean, comfortable win. It was a fight. And in that fight, in that refusal to fold when everything pointed toward defeat, fans back home saw something they recognized in themselves: resilience born from having to work twice as hard for half the recognition. That single match turned a promising young player into a national symbol overnight. Social media in the Philippines exploded. Sports bars stayed open past closing to watch the finish. A moment that could have gone unnoticed on the world stage became, in an instant, one of the most talked about sports achievements in the country's recent history. But here's the thing about breakthrough moments. They don't end the story. They start a new, much harder one. Because once the world sees what you're capable of, it starts expecting it. The pressure that follows a breakthrough is often heavier than the pressure that preceded it. And as Eala stepped off that court last year, she wasn't just a rising star anymore. She was a target. Every opponent she faced from that point forward would be studying her, preparing for her, trying to figure out how to stop the run before it grew into something unstoppable. That's the backdrop she carried into this year, a young woman no longer fighting for recognition, but fighting to prove that recognition was earned, not a fluke. And what she did with that pressure over the following months would silence any doubt that remained. If last year's U.S. Open introduced Alex Eala to the world, this year is when the world truly had no choice but to pay attention. The moment that changed the conversation happened not in New York, but on the grass courts of Wimbledon. Grass is unforgiving. It rewards experience, precision, and nerve, qualities that take years, sometimes entire careers, to develop. Few expected a rising star still finding her footing on the sport's biggest stages to make real noise there. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Eala defeated defending champion Iga Swiatek. Read that again. Not a struggling veteran, not an unseeded wildcard, the defending Wimbledon champion, one of the most dominant, technically gifted players of her generation. For a player still building her reputation, to knock out a champion of that caliber sent immediate shockwaves through the tennis world. It wasn't a fluke, and it wasn't close enough to be dismissed as a bad day for Swiatek. Eala played with a level of composure and aggression that made it clear this wasn't a lucky win, this was a statement. That victory pushed her into the second week of a Grand Slam for the first time in her career, a milestone that separates rising talents from players who are genuinely becoming elite. Suddenly, every tennis analyst, every commentator, every rival on tour had to recalibrate how they viewed her. She was no longer the feel-good underdog story. She was a legitimate threat. And here's where the tension really begins to build, because success like that doesn't come without scrutiny. The moment Eala beat one of the biggest names in the sport, she stopped being a surprise and started being a target. Every opponent she faced afterward walked onto the court knowing exactly who she was and exactly what she was capable of. The element of surprise, the thing that had fueled so many of her early wins, was gone. From that point forward, she would have to win not by sneaking up on people, but by being genuinely, undeniably better. That's a different kind of pressure. It's one thing to fight your way up when nobody expects anything from you. It's another thing entirely to keep winning once the entire tour is watching your every move, studying your patterns, waiting for the crack that proves you were never as good as that one signature win suggested. Eala didn't crack. If anything, she accelerated. Weeks later, she captured her first career WTA Tour title at the Mubadala DC Open in Washington, and the way she did it only reinforced the growing belief that this wasn't a one-tournament wonder. Along the way to that title, she defeated four-time Grand Slam champion Naomi Osaka, another statement win against one of the most decorated names in women's tennis. In the final, she faced American star Jessica Pegula and came back from a set down to close it out 4-6, 6-4, 6-0, a demolition in the deciding set that showed not just talent, but a competitor's instinct for the jugular once the momentum shifted her way. Two signature wins, two legends of the sport. In the span of a single summer, Alex Eala had gone from a name casual fans were still learning to pronounce to a player that every top-ranked opponent now circled on their schedule with genuine unease. This is the trigger. This is the moment the story stopped being about potential and started being about arrival. Because once you beat the players everyone else is afraid of, the conversation around you changes permanently. You are no longer hoping to be taken seriously. You are the standard other players are being measured against. And with that shift came something else, something heavier, something more complicated: attention. Not just from fans who adored her, but from critics who would now be watching for any sign that the rise was unsustainable, any dip in form that could be used as proof that she'd peaked too early. The trigger had been pulled. Now came the test of whether she could handle everything that followed. What happened next wasn't just a tennis story anymore. It became a cultural moment. Back in the Philippines, Elamania wasn't a media invention. It was a genuine, organic explosion of national pride. Every win was dissected, celebrated, and shared across millions of screens. Sports pages that rarely covered tennis suddenly couldn't get enough of her. Casual fans who had never watched a WTA match in their lives found themselves staying up past midnight, tracking scores from tournaments happening on the other side of the world. There's something powerful about watching a country fall in love with an athlete in real time. It isn't just about the wins, it's about what those wins represent. For a nation that has had to fight for recognition on the global sporting stage, Ella's rise became proof that talent from the Philippines could compete with and beat the very best in the world. Her climb to a career high ranking in the world's top 20 wasn't just a personal achievement, it became a shared national milestone, something an entire country could point to and say, "We did that too." And it wasn't only happening back home. International tennis media, which had largely overlooked her for years, began writing feature pieces trying to explain the sudden rise. Analysts who had never mentioned her name in a broadcast were now breaking down her forehand, her movement, her mental toughness under pressure. Fans in the United States, drawn in by her upset wins over Swiatek and Osaka, started following her matches even when the Philippines wasn't the storyline. They simply wanted to see what she'd do next. This is the part of a rise that can be intoxicating and dangerous in equal measure. Public adoration builds fast, and it builds loud. Every match becomes an event. Every press conference becomes a headline. The player at the center of it all is expected to keep performing at a level that satisfies expectations that are growing faster than any human being can realistically sustain. Ella, to her credit, didn't seem to shy away from the moment. She leaned into the responsibility of representing her country, speaking openly about wanting to inspire young Filipino athletes who might otherwise believe tennis wasn't meant for them. That kind of vocal, public embrace of the pressure is admirable, but it also raises the stakes even higher. When you tell the world you're playing for something bigger than yourself, the world holds you to that standard every single time you step on court. And it wasn't just admiration flooding in. With visibility comes commercial attention too. Nike, recognizing her growing marketing potential, began releasing limited edition apparel tied directly to her identity, designs echoing the colors of the Philippine flag, accessories inspired by national symbols, a customized shirt marking her connection to home. Her 2026 U.S. Open kit, a striking royal blue dress with basketball-inspired detailing, became a talking point of its own, generating buzz online before she had even played a single match at Flushing Meadows. Fans didn't just want to watch her win, they wanted to wear a piece of the story. This is what escalation looks like in modern sports. It's not just about performance anymore. It's about narrative, identity, and the emotional investment of millions of people who see something of themselves in one athlete's journey. That kind of collective hope is beautiful. It's also an enormous weight to carry onto a tennis court, match after match, tournament after tournament, with no room to simply have an off day without it becoming a headline. Because as Ella's profile rose higher and higher throughout the summer, so did the scrutiny waiting just beneath the surface, ready to seize on any stumble as evidence that the story had gotten ahead of the substance. No rise is a straight line, and for Eala, the North American hardcourt swing leading into the U.S. Open delivered exactly the kind of reality check that tests whether a breakout star can handle adversity as gracefully as she handles success. After the euphoria of Wimbledon and the DC Open title, Eala moved on to Toronto and then Cincinnati, two of the most competitive stops on the WTA calendar, and two tournaments where she suffered early exits. For a player who had spent the summer being talked about as the tour's next great success story, these results landed differently than they might have for someone with lower expectations attached to their name. Suddenly, the same voices that had been praising her breakthrough began asking different, harder questions. Was the rise sustainable? Had she peaked too early, riding a wave of momentum that opponents were now learning to counter? Every young athlete who experiences a meteoric rise eventually faces this moment, the point where results dip, even slightly, and the narrative threatens to shift from celebration to skepticism. It's worth pausing here to consider what that pressure actually feels like. Eala is 21 years old. She is carrying not just her own career ambitions, but the hopes of an entire country that has waited generations for a moment like this. Every early loss isn't just a professional setback, it risks becoming a referendum on whether the excitement around her was justified in the first place. That is an extraordinary burden to place on any young competitor, let alone one still developing at the highest level of a brutally demanding sport. And yet, this is precisely where her story reveals something deeper than a highlight reel of upset wins. Because how an athlete responds to adversity often says more about their future than how they respond to success. Eala has shown throughout her career a particular resilience, the same resilience that carried her back from a 1-5 deficit against Clara Tauson at last year's U.S. Open. Early exits in Toronto and Cincinnati weren't presented by those close to her camp as crisis points, but as part of a longer build-up, additional rest before the grind of a Grand Slam, a chance to recover physically and mentally after an exhausting stretch of tournaments. Still, the doubt doesn't simply disappear because there's a reasonable explanation. In the world of professional sports, perception moves fast, and it doesn't always wait for context. For a stretch of weeks, the conversation around Eala shifted from unstoppable rise to cautious wait-and-see. Fans who had been riding the high of Eala mania found themselves anxiously refreshing scores, hoping the next tournament would silence the creeping uncertainty. This is the uncomfortable truth about sudden stardom. The same visibility that brings adoration also brings exposure. When you're an unknown quantity, losses are shrugged off. When you're a rising star with a nation's expectations on your shoulders, every loss becomes a story of its own, dissected, debated, sometimes exaggerated far beyond its actual significance. But perhaps that's exactly the test that separates athletes who fade after one good season from those who build lasting careers. Because as the dust settled on a difficult stretch through Toronto and Cincinnati, all eyes turned toward one final defining question: could Alex Eala regroup, refocus, and deliver when it mattered most, on the biggest stage of the year, in the tournament that had already made her a piece of history once before? And now she's here, New York. The U.S. Open, the same tournament where 1 year ago, Alex Eala rewrote Philippine tennis history with a single unforgettable comeback. The same city, the same courts, the same pressure cooker atmosphere that turns promising careers into legendary ones, or exposes cracks that had been quietly forming all along. This time, she doesn't arrive as an unknown underdog looking to make a surprise run. She arrives as the world number 20, a Grand Slam second-week competitor, a player who has beaten two of the most decorated champions in the sport within the same calendar year. The expectations are different now. The story has changed, and so has she. There's a symbolic weight to her return to Flushing Meadows that's hard to ignore. This is where the breakthrough happened. This is where a nation first watched her refuse to lose when everything pointed toward defeat. Coming back to that same stage, carrying both the confidence of this year's historic wins and the lingering questions from recent early exits, creates a narrative tension that almost writes itself. Can she recapture the magic of last year's moment, this time with the whole tennis world watching instead of just discovering her? Adding another layer to this year's U.S. Open story is a new challenge entirely. Eala will step onto the mixed doubles court for the first time, alongside men's world number 4, Felix Auger-Aliassime. It's a partnership that came together, in her own words, somewhat by chance, an opportunity that emerged rather than one that was carefully planned for months. But in a tournament field stacked with star pairings, including top-ranked duo Novak Djokovic and Aryna Sabalenka, this unexpected teaming shows just how far Eala's stock has risen. A year ago, she was fighting to be noticed. Now, established stars are choosing to play alongside her. Speaking about the partnership, Eala expressed genuine excitement about the opportunity to learn from a player of Auger-Aliassime's caliber, a reminder that even amid the pressure and the history-making expectations, there's still a young competitor eager to grow, to absorb lessons from those further along in their careers, to treat even a bonus event at a Grand Slam as a chance for development rather than just spectacle. But make no mistake, singles is where this story truly gets decided. This is where the doubts from Toronto and Cincinnati either get answered or reinforced. This is where a nation holds its breath every time she steps to the baseline, wondering if this is the tournament where everything she's built this year finally clicks into place on the sport's biggest stage. There's also a quieter, more personal dimension to her arrival in New York this year. off the court, her rising profile has translated into visible symbols of pride. Her Nike kit for this tournament, a royal blue design echoing the colors of the Philippine flag, deliberately built to connect with the fans who have followed every step of her journey. It's a small detail, but a meaningful one. Even in the choice of what she wears onto Arthur Ashe or Louis Armstrong Stadium, there's an acknowledgement of everything and everyone she's carrying into this tournament. Analysts covering her preparation have been direct about what's at stake. The question isn't whether Eala has the talent to compete at this level. She's already proven that beyond doubt. The real question is whether she can sustain that level across the grueling demands of a Grand Slam, match after match, round after round, against opponents who will have studied every wrinkle in her game since her breakthrough summer began. If she reaches Arthur Ashe Stadium for a night session, a real possibility given her rising profile, it won't just be a match, it will be a culmination, a moment where every early exit, every skeptical headline, every ounce of pressure from an entire country's expectations either gets validated or tested one more time. This is the resolution the story has been building toward. Not a guaranteed happy ending, but a genuine, high-stakes opportunity for Alex Eala to prove that everything the tennis world witnessed this year, the upsets, the title, the historic breakthrough, wasn't a peak, it was a foundation. Whatever happens across the next 2 weeks in New York, one thing is already clear. Alex Eala has permanently changed what's considered possible for Filipino tennis. The only question left is how much further this particular chapter can go, and whether this is the tournament remembered as the moment she became not just a rising star, but a genuine Grand Slam contender. So, as she steps onto the courts of Flushing Meadows once again, is this the tournament where Alex Eala finally breaks through for good? Or is the story still being written, one hard-fought match at a time? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into her journey, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this one.